So Flemming Riis wants to tell us a little bit about how to make your Windows computer safe. Good luck.
Thank you. I know we probably spent the week laughing at Windows installs, but for a while yet, they're still going to be the baseline of many organizations. So try to make your life a little bit harder getting in. So I wanted to start with the top 10 stupid things we see, and then what we would do if we had a choice. A few quick questions. Who can run any random exe file on the Windows box if they had a Windows box? We usually see that very few or little organizations use any sort of whitelisting, meaning that they're basically screwed. The same for management network. We see people sitting on the same machine they use for Facebook and mail, being able to browse the IPMI interface of the servers. And at the same time, they're probably Windows local admins. If you're in the open source world, you probably use cubes. If you're in the Windows world and take admin work a little bit serious, you have what's called a privileged access workstation, which is a lockdown, it's a Windows version of cubes. Meaning that you have a base VM, a base machine that can't do anything, and then you have your different admin tasks in separate VMs. The purpose of this talk is that it starts with the basics. They're actually really hard in the real world. A lot of people laugh at people not being able to patch and people having firewalls disabled and a lot of stupid things. But usually there's a good reason, or there was 15 years ago, and the same AD has been carried around. So everything you made 15 years ago is still around today. I have a pet peeve about awareness campaigns in the IT world, meaning that every dollar you spend on awareness is a dollar wasted. If awareness worked, nobody would be smoking or driving a 15-year-old car on diesel. We see a lot of people throwing money at pen test and a lot of other things before we start doing basic things in Windows. If you need to get management attention to get some money for something, that might be a good idea. But if you try to improve security, it's a fairly amount of wasted time. And stop blaming users. People will click on anything because they're used to that due to bad IC processes in the company. They will also, one slide short, sorry. They'll also let people in through tailgating because there's no gates. And then people will plug in a Raspberry Pi in the network and then you'll get done. But stop blaming users and start blaming management. If a user has to type in a password 20 times a day, they will also type it in on any given website that pops up and ask them to do it. If they can enable macros, they will. That's just how users work because they are too busy with the real work. If anybody haven't seen this, Adam has posted a brilliant post on how you get domain admin in 30 minutes. It's valid in probably 99% of the companies around. And it's very easy to fix, the majority of them. And that's the purpose of this talk. So, Windows had actually a decent firewall since XP SP2. It's actually been working both in Windows 7 and Windows 10. What we usually see is that people turn it off, and if they're really good, they have it on when they're outside of the office. But if you have a firewall on the internal network, and somebody clicks on any given ransomware, it will spread and it will kill your machine. There's no inbound ports open on the default Windows install, but if you do this, then it's game over. So start with enabling firewall. If you have something that needs access, then at least go into the GPOs and set an IP address. So that's the only one that can talk into that machine. There's a brilliant talk by a Microsoft employee on how you do the firewall basics on Windows. Windows Update is a brilliant thing to disable if you want your computer not to be secure. There's always myths about updates breaking everything all the time, but in reality, it's still fairly rare. And if you have a little bit when larger environment, you will also have a test environment. So don't stop updating. That is still very common. Interactive logon on Windows, meaning when anyone that can access your computer log in with the domain admin, a domain user account, will be local admin. So if you go to your boss machine and log in, you're a local admin and therefore can access all files or place whatever backdoor you want. Still very common. It's very easy to fix. Start removing admin rights. And if people need access to one specific machine with admin rights due to development environment or really stupid application, then you can give that user access dynamically through a user group. User account control. If you install applications 10 times a day, it's probably very annoying. If you install something never or once every month, it's very nice to have enabled because it allows you to think one extra time when you have to click yes. Microsoft has a thing called a security boundary, meaning that if it's a security boundary and an exploit is found, it will be surfaced and it will be fixed. User account control is not what has been called a security boundary, meaning that there are some bypasses that can be exploited. But if you layer this on top with whitelisting, it's still very hard to get around. If you're running XP, if you're running Windows 7 in 2020 when there's no hotfixes around, then you should instead install Ubuntu, macOS, or whatever. Don't run old stuff. If you have an appliance that requires XP because the appliance cost $2 million and you need to run on that version, then you need to firewall it. We still see a lot of customers running old version of Windows. Our recommendation in smaller environments is to buy a Mac or buy any PC and put Linux on it. If you don't have any staff to maintain the Windows install base, then use something else. And especially for management, buy them an iPad. Any Windows but Home Edition has BitLocker, meaning that you can fully disk encrypt the file system. It's free if you have a non-home version, so please don't turn that off. It's sadly not enabled by default, so you need to enable that for yourself. People have, because people type in passwords 200 times a day as a Windows admin, people install Remote Desktop Manager or anything like that. And our friend that develops Mimikatz has of course found a way to extract the password files from a machine like that. Meaning that if you get to that machine and run Mimikatz, you have the password that is safe for everywhere else. So don't do that. The way around is remote management. Remote desktop is useful, but is per default insecure because it keeps password memory. There's some things in the newer version of Windows that can prevent that. We'll cover that in a minute. People that manage a lot of servers or have many admins usually have jump stations. So you are ensured that everybody's password is staying on the same box. So if one user is compromised, then you basically have lost everything. So jump stations, in theory, is a good idea. From a security point of view, they are horrible. Because Windows, again, leaves password in memory per default. You can hijack other people's sessions with RDP, meaning that you can do whatever you want in their name. NCLM was probably around 20-something years ago, which is a horrible insecure protocol. It's enabled by default in Windows. It's still enabled by default in Windows. You can deploy Windows 10. So that needs to be killed. And that is one of the top five reasons to get domain admins before launch. That is NCLM and responder, and because Windows happily gives out the hash of your password, because Windows is stupid. Or nice. Service account with less than 10 characters, service account being domain admin, service account never being cycled, which is fairly normal. If you have registered what is called a service principal name in Windows, anybody can ask for the hash of that, and then you can take that offline and you can hack that. So if you have a service account with a very bad password, it's almost the same as giving your domain away. What do we see? We see RDP session being open for the world to a web server. We've seen a web server being domain joined with a domain admin being logged on. Somebody elevates to domain admin, run psexec against every endpoint in the system because we can move around from A to B. Probably the same password on every local machine. We saw this as a company based in Denmark. The only reason they are still in operation today is that they forgot to domain join the backup server. It was supposed to be backup domain join because it was easier, but they forgot to do it. So when the ransomware spread internally and encrypted everything, it couldn't get to the backup server. That's the only reason why we're still in operation today. We didn't have any offsite backup. We didn't have any tape. Windows single sign-on and is very nice for the users, but it's also very dangerous if you don't do it correctly. We have usually apply a version of ELK called HELK, which is hunting and using Elasticsearch to get logs together. I'll show that in a minute. A lot of the companies we talk to don't have a budget for a CM solution. They don't have Splunk. They don't have a managed CM somewhere. But you can get very far using either Graylog or HELK or any other open source solution to get your logs in one place instead of spending a lot of money on magic. So basically what we did is that we took a standard Windows box, installed WinLog beads, which is used to ship log files from A to B. We installed a product from Microsoft called Sysmon, which is a free tool. And that has a XML file for the configuration, which basically logs what is important on the Windows box. So if somebody spawns a process, somebody starts a service, somebody deletes something, it gets logged and thrown to the ELK installation. I'll go back in time a little bit. So here we can see what processes have been run, which external IP addresses it's talking to, what's the process name itself, and we have the hash value of all the files. So we can take this information and run a check against VirusTotal or anywhere else. This is a free tool. It runs on, I installed it on Ubuntu. There's some issues running on CentOS due to the container configuration, so we usually run it on Ubuntu right now. If you don't have any logging, get started with this. It takes 20 minutes to download and install, and it takes 5 minutes to push out the GPO to the endpoint, so then you at least have some centralized logging, so we can see what's going on. And you can adjust your policy if you don't want to log, if you don't want to log endpoints IP for privacy reasons, but at least you can log what processes and file names are being accessed. And you can see if anybody installs a service. A lot of non-modern malware installs themselves as a service for a persistent model. So in a perfect world, install newest version 10 if you rely on Windows. If not, use anything else. It doesn't really matter today. You can run all management tools on anything but Windows. Device Guard I'll cover in 10 minutes. It's a whitelisting tool for Windows. Firewall rulings, block all inbound. That's the default policy. Enforce updates, enforce lockdown. The point of this talk was showing free tools. This has been reused for somewhere else. Microsoft has a product called Defender APT, which is an enhanced version of Windows Defender that actually works. There's a license cost associated with that. And of course, use VPN, and labs will be covered in 2 minutes also. So we at least see what's easiest. That is, if you start with locking down management, so they can't run random files because we are busy today, so they'll click on anything because we need to get the job done. You then do help desk and do admins and then do legal. And when management complains about their granddaughter or grandson can't install Minecraft, then give them an iPad. You can't have bring your own device. Bring your own device was invented, 10 years ago, so you could sell more hardware. But in the Windows world, it doesn't work from a security point of view. There's two whitelisting tools in Windows, allow deny tools. One of them is called AppLogger, the other is Device Guard. AppLogger has an audit policy, meaning that if you don't have time right now to do set up the allow deny rules, you can set it to audit, meaning that you'll still see everything that is being executed on the box. This combined with the Elasticsearch gives you an idea if something bad is on your network. VPAT, which is automatic proxy, which is the fastest way to get hacked on a hotel or anywhere random. It's very easy to disable with a group policy. Link local is a broadcasting protocol that never should have been invented, which is also what Python responder is using. This also takes 2 minutes to disable. NetBIOS was useful 15 years ago, and is still a security hole today. Sadly, there's no disable NetBIOS register key. You have to run a script because it's per net adapter. But you can run a PowerShell script on a startup on your machine. It will automatically delete NetBIOS on any adapters. That's the first thing we do. The second thing we do is basically go into Active Directory and kill everybody that is domain admin. There might be 1 or 2 real good uses for it, but in a normal environment, nobody should be domain admin on any admin user per default. The work around it is that you put a few trusted people into the built-in administrators on Windows, and then if you need something that requires a domain admin role, then you can add the people to that role and kick them out again later on. But it should always be a separate account, that is being used only on a separate VM, so we don't have a mix between security roles. We see anything from fax servers to backup products to anything that needs to be fixed right now being put into the domain admins because it's easier and faster. And it's also an easier and fast way to get hacked. Microsoft has a tool called Labs. Labs is a local administrative password solution. It's a free tool. It basically sets a group policy and dumps a DLL on a Windows machine. So every time the machine logs on, it checks if the password is within the change rate. So if you set 30 days, it will change the password automatically every 30 days. And you can set it to 20 or 40 or whatever cherishes you want. And it stores a copy in Active Directory that only admins or delegated people can look up. So you have an instant randomized local admin password on all endpoints, servers and workstations. And nothing should run as administrator locally. Most places we see people being wiped out is due to lateral movement. So no firewall ability to move from PC to PC if you just guess one password or hack one password. You can ask Maersk how they feel about lateral movement in their network. If you have to deploy management workstations, you need to set up a dedicated VM or dedicated terminal server per administrator instead of having them shared. From a licensing point of view, that is usually included in your license, so there's normally no additional license cost. And hopefully every organization has 4 gigs or 8 gigs of memory to spare per admin. But it's hard or close to impossible to secure a shared environment with admin people logged on. One other thing is that anybody that administers the domain or the highly secure account should not be able to log on to a machine that is below the security level. So meaning that a domain admin can't log on to a PC. You can only log on to a server that is used for that purpose. and you can restrict that in AD. So nobody by mistakes just logs on to their normal PC with domain admins because they just need to install something. Again, back to human nature. Sometimes if it's faster, even while it's not the best thing to do, people will still do it. In the perfect world, we'll just disable NCLM. A lot of things break when we disable NCLM. Access to old filers somewhere, RDP over to an external vendor. Some things in Outlook actually also breaks. So the first thing to do is go in and enable auditing. Then pick up that event in your Elk installation. And then you can see where it's actually being used. And then create a policy and only allow it on the 5 or 10 or 20 workstations where it's actually needed. There's a tendency in a lot of admin work today that if you can't save everybody on the same thing, then everybody should die. But if you can save 95% of the people, then let's do that. So at least look to where you can disable stuff and then do that. If you don't have, if you need to get on the system remotely and you don't have any real VPN or any two-factor authentication, don't set up RDP with a NAT from a world to your environment. At least set up remote desktop gateway. It's free. The ones we have installed in our test environment gets 0 brute force attempts. If we do a NAT to an RDP server, we get 5,000 an hour. So it's not perfect, but it beats having a world from to internal network NAT on RDP. Two-factor authentication you can buy from Duo Security or Cisco, whatever they call it today, for $3 or $4 per user per month. So it's not going to break your budget. Perfect world, VPN, then RDP with two-factor. You should never expose an internal Windows network from the outside in if you can avoid it. Windows per default doesn't sign and encrypt the traffic, which is also a very good way to do SMB relay attacks. Again, back to the top 5 things to do to get domain admin. One of them is set up SMB relay and then decrypt the password from that. If you sign and encrypt traffic, then these attacks won't work. There is a performance overlap, but in normal situations, you wouldn't notice. And still, a little bit slower file server versus security hole should win every day. BitLocker as mentioned, please do BitLocker. It's still free if you're an organization or a company. And please set up a PIN code for a boot to prevent at least the worst offline attacks. Service accounts, anything running as a service in Windows should be 24 characters or more. Admin accounts that you type in manually should be 24 characters or more. For the simple reason that if you have to brute force that offline, it hopefully takes longer time when you have to spend discovering the breach. Any normal user, as much as possible. We know that if you force them to 12 or 14 characters, they will probably use their maiden name and then a number. But hopefully over time people will learn. Or we get some tokens that actually work and is easily manageable. Password logouts. If you have a longer password, people will complain that they get logged out all the time. So we need to set the password logout a little bit higher. There's some issue about PCI compliance that they still require 6 logout attempts before you get logged out. So if you're in a PCI regulated environment, you need to be some, you can do some corrective controls to get around that. It's still going to be a pain. Windows has a feature called remote credential card, meaning that if you log onto a server without that, you leave your Kerberos and your NCLM ticket behind in memory on the machine. So if somebody else come onto that box and attacks that, you can your credentials are basically lost. And the same on your local machine. If somebody run Mimikatz on that, after you did the RDP session, it will store the admin password you just used to log on. Going back to nobody should be admin on the PC. We see a lot of people trying to reinvent the wheel, meaning that they don't go anywhere on hardening down Windows. CI Security have a lot of benchmark that is free and accessible. So please don't spend too much time on trying to reinvent everything. I would use their desktop and server policies, and then perhaps add a few layers on top of that. And don't forget, we've seen fairly decent lockdown Windows environments that had a L3 route to the HP servers, with had known exploits on the IPMI board. So that's probably outside of Windows domain control, but at least on domain controllers, if you run them physical, try to ensure that access to them is restricted to lockdown management networks. So the point about running random exe files. So if I download something from the internet that's not whitelisted by default, I'll get a block on my machine. Given that I use Slack, Zoom, Outlook, it took me 25 minutes to set up a fairly locked down machine. I downloaded the latest version of known bypasses, applied that to my lockdown policy, and you need to be fairly. I can't click on anything that will kill my machine. I can't run scripts. I can't run random files. I can't run random PowerShell files that does evil things. So this is a machine that works for probably 95% of the organization. Then there'll be some admins somewhere that need admin rights. There'll be some developers that need admin rights, and a lot of different use cases. But we usually just see that people don't install allow deny lists if they can't protect everybody from everything. But if you can protect the majority of things, then please take the time to do this. If you need to add something to, it's probably too small. You basically run a PowerShell script that scans the files you want to allow. And then it creates a ruling on this side is based on a hash of a file. It can also be based on the certificate. And then you can merge this file with whatever general policy you have. This is my general policy. I basically whitelist the majority of the Windows certificates, and then I have a Zoom and Slack, basically. And then I can merge this with my PuTTY policy now, and then I can apply that if I had admin rights, and then it's working. If you have admin rights, you can bypass this. There's a workaround saying that if you deploy device guard signed with a certificate, even if you're an admin, you can't revert this. Then you need to revert the policy back to unsigned, and then you can do that again. So you can also protect against local admins running things they shouldn't do, which is not possible based on AppLogger. There is a little bit about licensing on this part. You need Windows Enterprise to create the policy, but you can apply the policy on a Windows Pro. So you can still do this. It takes 1 or 2 days to get a decent policy up and running. And everything is available for free on this. There's a lot of blog posts, including on my own, to how we get device guard up and running. So if you are working on this, it makes life harder for somebody. And it is also a way to try to stop blaming users for clicking on something in a busy day, because they will always do this. They've done this for 30 years and they'll still do that. And if you deploy this, you don't have to buy Magic, APT, something software, unless you are somebody being actively targeted by a nation state somewhere. Then you will get very far very quickly on this. So stop spending the organization money on Magic and start spending it on humans instead. It's a fairly good trade-off. I think I talked faster than expected. Any questions?
Any questions?
That was easy. Perfect.
Well, let's give him a hand then.
Thank you for your time.